You know, I've been sitting here watching the news these past 36 hours, like the rest of you, and I want to talk to you not as a former president, but as a fellow American who's seen a few of these moments before. Because this is one of those moments, the kind that doesn't just change the headlines for a week, it changes the trajectory of a nation for a generation. Now look, when I heard that the United States had launched what the administration is calling Operation Epic Fury, a massive joint military offensive against Iran, I did what I always do. I took a breath. I tried to get the facts. And then I started asking the questions that I believe every American has a right to ask. We were told that hundreds of targets were struck: Revolutionary Guard facilities, air defense systems, 9 naval ships destroyed in minutes, and then the news that Ayatollah Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran, was dead. Let me tell you something, that is not a small thing. That is an earthquake in the international order. And earthquake have aftershocks. But here's what caught my attention most. The President of the United States announced all of this in a 6-minute video on Truth Social, not from the Oval Office, not before a joint session of Congress, not with the weight and solemnity that sending Americans into combat demands. And we'll come back to that in a moment, because I think the way this was communicated tells us something important about the way this decision was made. Now, I've been around long enough to know that when a president commits American forces to combat, the first question isn't whether we can win. We have the most powerful military the world has ever known. The first question is whether we did it the right way, whether we brought the American people along, whether we respected the institutions that exist precisely for moments like this. Because I'll tell you from experience, the decisions you make in the first 48 hours of a military operation shape everything that follows. Everything. The alliances you build, the legitimacy you carry, the trust you earn. So tonight, I want to walk through what happened, what it means, and what I believe comes next. And I want to do it honestly. Let me tell you what I know about Iran, because I didn't just read about it in briefing books. I lived it from behind that desk in the Oval Office. When I was president, I dealt with Iran every single day in one form or another, whether it was their support for Hezbollah, their efforts to destabilize the Gulf, or the early warning signs of a nuclear program that nobody wanted to talk about publicly yet. I ordered strikes against Iraq in 1993 and again in 1998. I understood the weight of those decisions, and I understood something else, that the Middle East doesn't operate on simple logic. Every action creates 10 reactions, and most of them you didn't plan for. Now we've got to remember where this story really begins. It goes back to 1979. The revolution, the hostage crisis, the beginning of a relationship defined almost entirely by hostility and mistrust. For nearly 50 years, Iran has been a state sponsor of terror. They've funded Hamas, they've funded Hezbollah, they've armed militias across Iraq and Syria. Nobody serious disputes that. But here's the honest truth. There was a moment when we had a different path. The JCPOA, the nuclear deal negotiated under President Obama in 2015, wasn't perfect. I said so at the time, but it was something. It was a framework. It had inspections. It had verification. It had buy-in from our European allies, from Russia, from China. And in 2018, President Trump walked away from it. No replacement, no alternative framework, just maximum pressure and a bet that isolation would bring Iran to its knees. It didn't. What it did was accelerate their enrichment program, harden the regime's grip on power, and narrow the diplomatic space to almost nothing. So when people ask me, was military action against Iran inevitable? I say, no, it was never inevitable. But it became a lot more likely the day we abandoned the only diplomatic architecture we had. And that's not hindsight. I said it then, and I'm saying it now. Nobody in their right mind thinks the Iranian regime is a force for good. That is not the question. The question is how a great democracy confronts that threat, and whether we do it in a way that makes us stronger or weaker in the long run. Now let me walk you through what we actually know, because in moments like this, facts matter more than anything. On February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched Operation Epic Fury, a coordinated military offensive against Iran that the president himself described as one of the largest and most complex operations the world has ever seen. Hundreds of targets were hit: Revolutionary Guard facilities, air defense systems across the country, Three nuclear sites, Ford, Natanz, and Esfahan, struck with what the president called a full payload of bombs. 9 Iranian naval ships destroyed along with their shipbuilding infrastructure, all in a matter of minutes. And then the most consequential fact of all, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader of Iran for 36 years, was killed in the strikes. The entire senior military command was reportedly eliminated alongside him. The president said thousands of Iranian military and police were calling to surrender, seeking immunity. Let me also tell you what else happened. 3 American service members were killed in action. Iran launched counterattacks on US military bases in the region, fired missiles toward Israel, and struck targets in Gulf states, including Qatar and the UAE. Explosions were heard across the Middle East. Oil markets went into immediate turmoil. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes every single day, faces potential disruption. And here is where I need you to pay very close attention. In that 6-minute video, the president didn't just announce a military operation. He called on the Iranian military to surrender or face certain death. He urged the Iranian people to rise up and take back their country. He explicitly called for regime change. Now that last part, that's where things start to get complicated, because regime change is not a military objective, it's a political ambition. And there is a very big difference between destroying a government's capacity to threaten you and deciding you're going to choose what comes next for 88 million people. History has taught us that lesson more than once, and it taught it to us the hard way. Here's something I learned sitting in that chair. The way you start a war determines how it ends every single time. Now look, when a president sends Americans into harm's way, there is a sacred obligation that comes with that decision. You owe it to the country to exhaust every alternative. You owe it to Congress to bring them into the room. And you owe it to the men and women in uniform to make sure the mission is clear, the strategy is sound, and the objectives are achievable. That's not politics. That's the basic architecture of how a constitutional democracy wages war. Article 1 of the Constitution gives Congress, not the President, the power to declare war. That's not an accident. The founders put that there because they understood what happens when one person has unchecked authority to commit a nation to conflict. And what happened here? These strikes were launched without congressional authorization. Democrats and even some Republicans have said publicly that they were not consulted. Hakeem Jeff has pledged to force a war. Powers vote. The New York Times is reporting that lawmakers are questioning whether an imminent threat was ever truly established. Let me tell you something from experience. When I ordered strikes, I understood that I was borrowing authority from the American people through their representatives. Even when I acted quickly, I knew I owed Congress answers, real answers, not a social media video. And that brings me to the communication itself. The President of the United States announced a major war with American casualties, with a foreign head of state killed, with counterattacks already underway in a 6-minute video on Truth Social, not from the Oval Office, not before the American people in a formal address, not with the gravity and solemnity that the moment demanded. I listened to the language, the branding, the boasting about military rebuilding, the personal credit-taking, and I thought to myself, this is a moment that calls for Lincoln, and what we got was a press release. Was there no other path? Were diplomatic options truly exhausted? Because I'll tell you, when you start dropping bombs, diplomacy doesn't stop. It just gets a lot harder and a lot more expensive. And the families of those 3 fallen service members deserve to know that every single alternative was tried before their loved ones were put in the line of fire. Now I want to talk about something that doesn't make the headlines as easily as explosions and military strikes, but matters just as much, maybe more. What this does to our democracy at home. We've got to remember that the founders designed a system with checks and balances for exactly this kind of moment. They didn't want kings. They didn't want emperors. They wanted a president who was powerful enough to act, but accountable enough to answer. And what we've just witnessed is the most significant military operation in decades being launched by one man, announced on a social media platform without the informed consent of the people's representatives in Congress. Now Congress is scrambling to assert its authority after the fact. War powers resolutions are being drafted, votes are being demanded. But let me ask you something. If you have to fight to be included in a decision after the bombs have already fallen, What does that tell you about the health of your institutions? Let me put it this way. If the mayor of your town decided to demolish the town bridge and build a new one without telling the city council, without a public hearing, without giving a single citizen the chance to ask a question, you'd be outraged. And what we're talking about here is not a bridge. It's a war. It's American lives. It's the future of an entire region. And this is part of a larger pattern that concerns me deeply: the erosion of congressional oversight, the concentration of decision-making in the executive branch, the use of social media as a governing tool rather than a communication supplement. When the platform where you announce a war is the same platform where people post memes and conspiracy theories, something has gone fundamentally wrong with how we treat the gravity of these decisions. Now, here's what I'll also say, and I think this is important. Democrats themselves are split on this. Some support the strikes on national security grounds, others are calling it a war of choice. And you know what? That honest disagreement is actually democracy working the way it should, people wrestling with hard questions in public in good faith. That's the system functioning. What isn't the system functioning is when those people are cut out of the decision entirely and left to debate the wreckage after the fact. Even if this operation succeeds militarily, and I pray that it does for the sake of every American in uniform tonight, the precedent it sets is dangerous. A president launching a major war unilaterally, branding it like a product, calling for regime change without a strategy debated by Congress, that weakens something inside our democracy that's very hard to rebuild once it's broken. Now, I want to ask a question that may make some people uncomfortable, but I think it has to be asked. In a moment like this, who benefits politically? Look, I'm not going to sit here and accuse any president of starting a war for poll numbers. I wouldn't want that said about me, and I won't say it about anyone else. But here's what I will say. When you make a decision this consequential, when American lives are on the line, when oil prices are surging past $100 a barrel, when the Strait of Hormuz is effectively shut down and tanker traffic has halted, you have to be able to look the American people in the eye and say, I did this for you and your children, not for me and my political standing. That's a test every president has to pass, and the American people are the ones who grade it. What concerns me is the strategic gamble at the heart of this. The president is betting that by decapitating the regime, killing the supreme leader, destroying the military command, calling on the people to rise up, this ends quickly and decisively, and I understand the appeal of that logic. But I've seen this movie before. We saw it in Iraq in 2003. We saw it in Libya in 2011. Destroying a regime is the easy part. It's what comes after that breaks you. You need a political plan for 88 million people. You need allies who are genuinely with you, not just quietly nodding while hedging their bets. NATO allies are already expressing concern. Gulf states that host our bases just got hit by Iranian missiles in Bahrain. Qatar. The coalition behind this is thinner than we're being told, and the strength of any military operation is measured not just by firepower, but by the legitimacy and partnership behind it. Now let me tell you what keeps me up at night, because I think you deserve honesty about where this could go. Scenario 1. The best case. The strikes succeed. Iran's nuclear capability is destroyed. The regime collapses. The Iranian people, who have shown incredible courage and protests over the years, build something new. That would be a historic achievement. But let me be clear about what that requires. Years of sustained diplomatic engagement, economic support, international cooperation, and a patience that, frankly, I'm not sure the American public has the appetite for after 2 decades in Afghanistan and Iraq. Nation building is not a 6-minute video. It's a generational commitment. Scenario 2. The regime is degraded, but survives. It goes underground, and what you get is a prolonged asymmetric war, proxy attacks on our bases across the region. Hezbollah has already warned of a major response. Oil prices are already spiking. Analysts are saying one day of a full Hormuz blockade could push crude to $120 a barrel or higher, that hits every American family at the gas pump and the grocery store. Cyber attacks on our infrastructure. A slow bleed that drains our treasury and our patience. Scenario 3. Regional escalation. Iran's counterattacks have already hit Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Israel. If Hezbollah fully activates, If Iraq destabilizes further, if Russia or China see an opportunity to exploit the chaos, then we're not talking about one conflict anymore. We're talking about something much larger. Scenario 4. A humanitarian catastrophe inside Iran. Civilian casualties mounting. A refugee crisis that destabilizes every neighbor. And the administration has not told us what peace looks like. You can win every battle and still lose the war if you don't know what the end game is. I'm still waiting to hear what peace looks like. Let me close with this, and I mean it from the bottom of my heart. Tonight, 3 American families are grieving. 3 service members who put on the uniform, raised their hand, and gave everything for this country. And the president himself has said there will likely be more. Whatever I think about the decisions that led to this moment, my first thought and my last thought are with them. Every criticism I've made tonight is not of the men and women serving, it is of the process that sent them there. I have always believed, and I believed it when I sat in that office, and I believe it now, that America is strongest when we lead with our values, when we act through our institutions, when we build real coalitions, when we exhaust every diplomatic option before we drop the first bomb, and when we go to war, we do it as a last resort with the informed consent of the American people through their elected representatives in Congress. The Iranian regime is dangerous. Preventing a nuclear Iran is a legitimate goal. I will not dispute that, but how we achieve that goal defines who we are as a nation. And right now, I worry that we've chosen a path that may achieve a tactical victory while doing lasting damage to the constitutional principles that make us worth defending in the first place. So here is what I'm asking. I'm asking Congress to assert its authority, not next month now. I'm asking the administration to present a clear strategy with defined objectives, a realistic timeline, and an exit framework. And I'm asking every American to demand accountability, because this democracy does not belong to one party or one president. It belongs to all of us. I have always believed that America's greatest strength is not our military, though it is the finest the world has ever seen. It's our capacity to correct course. We've done it before. We can do it again. But only if we remember that no one person, no matter how powerful, gets to decide alone when and where we go to war. Let's get this right. We owe it to those 3 families. We owe it to every service member out there tonight. And we owe it to ourselves. Thank you for listening, and God bless the United States of America.